So this morning we're going to kick off something a little different. It's not going to be a straight Q&A. I think it's probably going to be even more enjoyable. We're going to do an interactive Q&A with Peter Wang. Peter Wang is the co-founder and CEO of Anaconda. I don't know if he really needs much more introduction than that. I think a lot of people know and love Peter. So please, we're really stressing, let this be interactive. Just start a discussion and I'll kick it over.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. And just to reiterate what he was saying, all of these meetups in these areas start with 1 or 2 people. So don't ever feel like, oh, it's just me, or just like, you know, the Austin Python community started with me grabbing beers with 2 other people. One guy who was moving to the West Coast, and he handed me over the duties of, he's like, hey, you want this meetup thing? Because like no one ever comes, and there's just 3 of us here at the Gingerman. And that's now, you know, like 5,000 people or something. What's the latest, Jacob, what's the latest registration count? Yeah, 6,600 people registered in Austin Python. Now, granted, it took like, whatever, 13 years or something, but in all these places, I would encourage you to think about, you know, how to get involved and be realistic about your time, obviously, but the community grows as the result of efforts of folks like yourself, you know, really just starting the ball rolling. So with that, I'm open for questions about anything and everything. All right, you gonna run the microphone to him?
Name's Travis.
Hi, Travis.
He didn't actually plan me here. This is a. But, tell me a little bit about how did PyData get started? I want to hear your perspective on that. I don't think, you know, I haven't actually heard your perspective on how did PyData get started.
Oh, you haven't? I think that you've gotten sick of hearing me tell the story by now. But actually, it's actually possible you haven't ever heard me give it this way. So we were in the spring of 2012, we just started the Continuum Analytics, which we now renamed to Anaconda. And I realized that there were a lot of people interested in the topic and excited about the topic of using Python for data analysis. Now, Wes had released Pandas about a year ago. A year prior to that point, the IPython notebook had just come out in the previous year in 2011. And so there was a lot of activity starting to swirl around this. And it felt to me like keeping all of these things under the SciPy brand would be challenging, because it should be no surprise to most people here in today's world, in business, scientific stuff sounds very geeky and niche. But data analysis is cool, especially around that time. Big data was kind of, we're reaching peak Hadoop at the time. And the second derivative flattened out, but the first derivative, you know, still going strong. But I decided that, you know, we wanted to pull people together who were interested, and almost on a whim, I was like, you know, this just fits, Python data, PyData, let's just call it that. And surprisingly, no one has squatted the GitHub repo, like it was just not even there. So I was like, great, cool. So I registered the domain, did all this other stuff, and pulled together a little workshop in Mountain View. Google hosted us. Julie Steele, who's at O'Reilly at the time, helped organize and get some resources around. And we just had a really fantastic little workshop of like 60 or 70 people. At that workshop, several things happened. Number one, Guido stopped by because he was still at Google at the time, and we didn't actually formally invite him. We didn't think he'd have the time or the interest, but he actually came by very nicely. And then we did a sit down with him, and it was in that moment that Travis and others, Fernando and others, approached him about, look, can you please help us fix Python packaging? That was 2012. And we'd already been banging on Python packaging for 10 years at that point. And we're like, can you please help us fix it? And he's like, you know, it's possible that the needs of packaging for the scientific and numerical community are just too exotic. You should fix it yourselves. You should do your own thing. And so that was actually not the cover, but that gave us, we're like, okay, fine. So now we're going to just do our own thing. We can do that. And the other thing that happened at that point was there was a talk by Chris Mueller about Disco, which is a framework for doing MapReduce on top of Erlang in Python. It was released by Nokia. It was an interesting thing, but that was, again, peak Hadoop. Everyone wanted, everyone was talking about MapReduce. And so we thought, okay, we have a Python native framework for doing this. But then it occurred to me, you know, building on the packaging issues, looking at how hard it was just to get a basic Python install of IPython notebook and everything on everyone's computers for that workshop. I turned to Travis and I said, you know what, if we have this much trouble shipping SciPy, Matplotlib to everyone, there's no way we're getting Erlang and this like Python MapReduce, there's just no way, right? And that was, I think, before that was before IPython Notebook, the conversion, the MB convert had a hard dependency on Haskell, right? So this was even before that. So anyway, so I was just like, we need to create a new distribution of Python for data analysis or big data. And it's a big snake, so we should call it Anaconda. And that's actually, it was at that workshop. So that was March 2012. Long-winded answer to a very simple question, but thank you for listening.
What do you hope to accomplish at Anaconda in 2020?
Great question, thank you. In 2020, so I just took over CEO 2 months ago, and 2020, a lot of big things are happening. So for the company itself, we're launching a new product, and in January, we'll have a kind of bigger announcement around that. So I hope for that product launch to be successful, partnerships around that to be successful. I would like to figure out ways that we can create deeper strategic partnerships with other major players in the industry and help bring them to the community. Because one of the things that's become apparent to me is that we can try our darndest to pay for open source devs and to sponsor this and sponsor that, but we at the end of the day, we're limited by how much dollars we have. But like a transistor, our little bit of current might unlock a much bigger amount of current if we put it in the right way. And so in all of the partnership discussions I've been having with other people, I'm always slotting in their conversations about how do we help you be more strategic in your investments in the community. Because these large companies, and many of them, they're the sponsors here and other places, the big PyData conferences and other things like that, they show up, but they spend so much more money. They just throw it to the wind, doing all sorts of stuff that's ineffective. And so I want to help channel those dollars to the community. And additionally, I would like for us to play a stronger role in helping the community as well as the commercial industry come to a better understanding of what the value of open innovation is. In my talk after this, I think it's going to be upstairs, I'll talk more about the essential nature of what we've done in open source in this community that's very different than previous open source kinds of efforts and communities, and why it's so essential at this point in time, especially in the machine learning and AI space, for companies to get together and actually push open standards forward as opposed to create walled gardens. So that's another big hope for me for 2020 is that we can, at Anaconda, we can use our platform, our megaphone, just our brand to drive some of that stuff.
Python is in a very different state of life cycle than when PyData first got started. It was fun, back then it was kind of rebellious, or transgressive in certain contexts. And my question is, how does the Python community keep that excitement going, or even renew that excitement in the next 10 years?
And this is, of course, just a caveat. This is assuming Western civilization continues for another 10 years, right? Okay, so with that proviso, we're not going to model out the other kind of high variance outcomes outside of that. Within that cone of possibilities, I think Python still remains transgressive in many places, just the language itself, right? I'm on customer calls all the time where people are complaining, look, IT just doesn't they don't know how to manage Python. They use Python for their own shell scripts. They do some of that stuff. But the application development part of IT has no idea how to manage Python. And the weird thing, I don't know how many people are aware of this, but Python is one of the I think it's probably the only top 10 language, certainly the only language that's ever made to #1 that didn't have massive industry business player pushing the language. That's extremely rare, right? So if you think about C#, obviously that was Microsoft, right? JavaScript was pushed by the major web developers, web vendors. They put so much manpower into that. And Java, obviously, from Sun. So Python is a community volunteer effort that has managed to make it to #1, right? I mean, so part of that, a consequence of that, is that we have not actually had a giant corporate marketing engine behind Python, telling IT and CIOs and managers, this is safe to use, this is good to use. In fact, I would say right now, there is a non-trivial number of people who would say, we want to lean our company, we must march towards AI, whatever that means. But at the same time, we can't use this, what's this open source Python crap, right? And so there are many people who hold those two ideas in their head and don't think they're different ideas. Don't realize they're fundamentally, that there's a contradiction there. And so to change that, to change minds, just takes time and takes dollars at the end of the day. So Python is still transgressive, and we have to fix that actually in order to take over corporate. Python, however, to be the substrate for new innovation has to be, I would say innovative then, maybe not transgressive, but rebellious, right? It has to be a fun thing to continue to use. And I think the great thing about the Python ecosystem is that you can find your niche of cool stuff to do wherever it is. If you just want to go and build, if you want to use Kiwi and Beware, do some fun things, if you want to do MicroPython and microcontrollers, it's all there for you. No one's stopping you from using it. What we don't have is we don't have a single unified story of Python, the blah language. And this is a consequence of Python's strength as a glue language for so long. It's hard to have a single identity then. But I think it's okay for it to be a mixing bowl of sorts of different use cases and different things. I think that's actually really wonderful. The challenge is if we start, because now we're a mixing bowl, that's number one. Now everyone's going to start picking off use cases from us, right? Google's pushing Swift for TensorFlow or TensorFlow JS. Over here on the kind of in the classical system scripting side, you've got Rust and Go always still there. So there's like little things on all these different places. And at the end of the day, Python doesn't run on anything with an actual user interface, right? So it doesn't run on the browser, doesn't run on the mobile. It runs on the back end and runs on the terminal. And because of Jupyter, we have now a presence in the web. But without that, we'd really be hosed. So that's kind of a weird thing. The top language in the world doesn't actually have a user interface for people to build UIs very easily, the way that, you know, an equivalent way to VB in like 96. So I think that's definitely a frontier that we have to unlock. But then beyond that, I think Python over the next 10 years, if it's to survive as a language, at a meta level, it has to develop the ability to do strategic product management and not merely evolutionary, creep along, figure out where things are. Because I think for Python to go from, right now Python is like 30 to 40 million users is I think the estimate. And the data science use cases will continue, the ML use cases will continue going strong. But I think for us to get to 100 million people, something very, very significant and different has to change.
Could you please throw some light on any upcoming efforts to integrate Python and R? I'm aware of RPy, RPy2 and all that. Is there any, I mean, I've dealt with it several years back. Do you have anything cooking up to make it easier for
I'm not doing
users
any cooking there. I know that our studio is actively aware, our studio is aware of the fact that Python is no longer an upstart competitor to R, but rather is now the dominant language for machine learning. So I think our studio has been making efforts to try to be a good environment for R and Python and to deliver some of these things. But I mean, but there are people, right? I mean, they've got a few Python people there now, but to build a good bridge, you need people who care about both sides equally. So I am not personally making any investments there. I don't really, I have not much visibility. I do think that we, not for R specifically, but interlanguage interop, multi-language interop is, there are efforts in that area that I think will help the R story as well as many others, right? So obviously Arrow, having a unified system of data interchange across languages helps R, helps Java, Python all work together better on large data sets. And then on the front end, right, polyglot interfaces, almost everyone who's now pushing out a Jupyter Notebook, Jupyter Lab kind of environment supports multiple languages. And so now you've got that. So between that and the back end, and then some basic FF5 kinds of calling abilities, it's like probably 65 to 85% good enough. Sorry, I don't have a stronger answer, but that's kind of how I look at it.
Okay, so what about Python for high school or data for high school? Do you have like any tool do you recommend, or because I think there is a big gap there that is since on high school the kids or the people don't know what is programming or Python or data science even less.
Well, so from a tooling perspective, I think notebooks are a very friendly format for doing this kind of thing. And people have built literate programming and instructional materials around this kind of stuff. If you look at Data Camp, for instance, you look at what Kaggle has, all these different folks have environments that are very friendly, web-based, right? Google is leaning very strong with Colab, and I'm sure, I don't know if it's available in Google Educational Suite yet, but it's certainly, it would be an obvious thing to make available there. So from a tooling perspective, and also we're aware of many people in the at the high school level just doing the standard thing of downloading Anaconda and doing something locally. But of course, in a school computer lab, that can get cumbersome because it's such a large install. For the basic tooling, I think some of the notebook-based stuff is like kind of okay, kind of good enough. Now, there's two more things beyond that, though. So there's basic tooling, then there's conceptual frameworks, right? Because you're right, they're not software developers, and actually most data scientists will never become software developers. Software development is a very much deeper and bigger set of concerns than using a language to communicate quantitative reasoning, then basically glorified calculator, right? And I think that's a really important thing for people to keep in mind, the separation between, I can use Python to go and make Dropbox or Instagram, or I can use Python to go and like clobber the CSV file. Those are two very
Nope, this one.
Oh.
Promise you
How about? All right, cool. Those are very, very different use cases. Yep. 1 second here. Those are very different use cases, and we should teach them differently. And I don't know how much sort of teach the teacher there is around this stuff, right? Because you can absolutely see some high school instructor who's got tons of other stuff that she needs to worry about, and she goes and she starts trying to do a standard CS introductory curriculum when she should be teaching a data science introductory curriculum. Those are very different things, because if you're doing computer science programming, what you're teaching people is not so much the language as much as how to reason about iterated systems and the internals of a virtual machine, the operating system underneath, the network, and all this other kind of stuff. If you're using data science, you want people to reason about the structure, schema, and meaning of data, and how to bring all of this computational firepower to that problem. Those are two completely different things. It's like English for writing legal documents versus English for like poetry. These are different Englishes, even though it's all English. And I think that awareness needs to be really driven home. I would encourage any and all of you, every one of you, to keep that in mind, and please repeat that idea to people, because a lot of people don't know, right? A lot of people simply don't know. They're like, it's programming now, I'm a coder. It's like you're scripting a bunch of stuff. That's different, that is code, but it's different code than actually going building giant, class abstractions and type hierarchies. And the third thing, though, very long answer, but the third thing that's missing for instruction for a lot of these folks is this idea, I think, to be effective in teaching people, complete newbies, the power of computers. What you want to do is actually not teach them just how to code. That's like teaching people to cook by teaching them how to measure different ingredients out, stir, apply heat here, how to fricassee something. But you actually have to teach them to enjoy the taste of food. You have to give them the why. When we teach people things, and this is a general problem in pedagogy in general here in the modern day, but when we teach people to code for doing data analysis, we have to teach them the why and get them excited about it. You have to close the loop. I can write this thing and this makes this car do this cool thing. I can write this thing and now, whoa, I know something about my local city, county, something I didn't know before. So giving people the desire, before you give them a fish or teach them how to fish, let them taste a bit of fish and see how delicious that is. I love seafood, so very nice metaphor for me. But you see what I'm saying? Like, it's really important, because if all we do is teach people the rote technique, even if they're good at doing the rote technique of data analysis, have we really taught them, right? I think it's really important then for Python, in order to get to that, I think to James's question about the next 10 years, for Python to be powerful over the next 10 years, it has to be the language and the environment in which people can taste that delicious taste of control, of I can use a computer to extend my ideas. And that requires a lot of additional development from a framework perspective for Python. It should be easy to run the browser, easy to share, easy to visualize stuff. It should be easy to drive little robotic things. It should be easy to go and talk to massive data sets. All these things need to be easy, because then I can actually get a flavor of why this is really awesome. So, next question.
Hi, I work in a small business, so we don't have nearly the resources, either financial or people, that a large business would. but we're still heavily dependent upon all the things in the PyData ecosystem. What do you wish that small businesses would be doing more of to help support the community?
So small businesses, I would hope you have a shorter decision-making stack, right? That it's just a smaller beast, so the neural structure is smaller. And so if you say, hey, here's a really important thing I think that we should do, that idea can go up a fewer levels of management and back, right? And that's, I would say, probably the most differentiating aspect between a small business and a big business. A big business is just every level of the stack you add more politics, and then the message from an innovator, from a doer, a person down in the trenches, that gets lost up the chain. In a small business, hopefully you don't have that as much, and you can then make the same points that we make in the big business, but have a greater chance of success, right? You can say, look, what are the values we care about as a business, and then match those to the values, to why we want to support the open source community, right? If you're a big business, for instance, I'll give you a couple of concrete examples. For a big business, we tell them, hey, you should show up at one of these community events because it's a great representation. You can hire data scientists and hire really cool devs and things like that. So it's a great recruiting technique. And a big business will make a decision, well, how much budget do we allocate for recruiting? How much budget do we put in so on and so forth? And they make this big numerical play on a spreadsheet because ultimately they want to hire 100 data scientists, right? And they want to solve that problem. If you're a small business, maybe you're only hiring 1 or 2. Or maybe you have a few data scientists, but you want them to stay more loyal to the company and to feel like, hey, the company's invested in my career growth and me growing my skills. And so then you're solving for a much smaller set of things, and then you can say, well, we'll send you, let's get it to where you can go and submit some talks, right? And you show up at these conferences. And by the way, you talk to the business owners and say, we should invest and sponsor this conference a little bit so that, the people, so if we need to hire or whatever, we only need to hire 1 or 2 people. We don't need to try to figure out a strategy for hiring 100 people. So you can be much smaller dollar amounts, but also much more tactical like that. Other ways, another thing is if you say, well, look, we don't have very many IT people, we don't have very many software devs, we're trying to get a lot done with a skeleton crew, we really need this stuff to be stable, because if this thing blows up or that feature disappears, we are hosed, right? So how do we do that? How do we affect those communities? Well, we need to actually get our folks to spend a bit of their time interacting with that. We have one person on the team that maybe they're a third or a quarter of their time at least is spent keeping touches with the open source communities of the core projects we use, so they're abreast of what changes are coming. They can actually put some feedback and say, hey, can you guys please hold off on that RC just now, because this thing is actually breaking a unit test case we have, right? That kind of thing, it's about having control agency over your technological future. And that would be an argument I would make kind of at a mini CTO level, right, as a recommendation. Besides that, showing up in the local community is really, really powerful. Right? You don't have to sponsor global PyData and give a ton of money to NumFOCUS, although if you can, that'd be great. But sponsoring, just being a regular sponsor for the local community is a very powerful thing. And it's much more cost effective. So those are some concrete ideas.
Peter, I think it's a great idea of talking about NumFOCUS and how small businesses can support them as well. I would probably align myself with those comments. I think that's great. I would mention even just sending a team to a PyData conference. Every ticket donation is money that gets put back into these projects.
That's right.
So hopefully that's a mutual win-win. You guys get to attend hopefully a cool conference and money gets put to the projects.
Can you comment a little bit about the rising of VSCode, especially in the community of data scientists, which is somehow competing with, let's say, Jupyter Lab and the ecosystem of Jupyter?
Yeah, I think the front-end IDE sort of competition has been interesting to watch. I don't know how I don't really know how it will shake out. I'll just say a few things. Since I've been programming since 1986, and dev tools are a notoriously difficult space to build a business in. Borland was excellent, and they got destroyed by Microsoft. IBM made Eclipse, and yet JetBrains and IntelliJ still kind of won there to some extent. Eclipse is still used a lot, but JetBrains does very well. JetBrains is like a rare exception, right, in the dev tooling space. but there's just not that many players. And the reason is because developers are cheap. Developers do not want to spend money on tools if there's a free thing over here. And if the thing is deficient, and they're also very picky, and if the thing is deficient in any way, they're going to roll up their sleeves and spend a weekend building some kludgy little thing that's actually worse, but because they built it, they think it's awesome, right? And so, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's really hard to sell tools to people who can then build their own tools. So, so that's just a very difficult space to compete in. The fact that Jupyter was successful, it's this rare blossom in the forest, right? That a new thing came around, it was successful. And keep in mind, Jupyter was not the only thing in this space. Spider is still very popular, and still exists, and still has, I believe Quantside is funding the development there. I guess my point was going to be, development tools are a notoriously finicky and fickle space to try to compete in. The fact that Jupyter was successful should not be seen as the beginning of a new trend, but perhaps as a one-off. And it should be only natural to expect that all of the people with tons of dollars will start flooding into the market to try to capture the coder interest, whether developers or data scientists, to capture that coding interest and rope them into their walled gardens. And so I don't know if you've seen the latest SageMaker release. It's gorgeous. It looks really wonderful, right? VSCode is very nice, and VSCode is very open. SageMaker is, of course, closed, but there's tools that will be, I mean, Colab, right, is there at Google, and it really is very nicely integrated with the entire Google and GCP environment. So I think this is a little unfortunate, but it's a natural thing that happens. If the open source community, if the community of users actually cares to maintain an open system here, I think there's no free lunch. You have to pay devs. User experience doesn't come for free. Product management doesn't come for free. Docs, design, integration, all of these things. I mean, you're literally building end user software. That stuff doesn't come for free. Someone's got to come up with the dollars. And the core Jupyter team for a long time tried to figure out how to fund it through donations from different institutes and grants and all these other kinds of things. And you know, you can do that for 100 years and it'll be a fraction of Microsoft's marketing budget for 1 year, right? And so I think this then ties into, again, some stuff I'll talk about in my next session. The open source community needs to actively be cognizant of the fact that it is now a very delicious fish in an ocean full of sharks. And how is this little fleshy fish going to build a hard shell so it actually defends its values, or will it just kind of be rendered into meals for all of these other folks? There's a very brutalistic way of describing it, but that is how I see it. Because I think there's something very powerful in everyone in this room being able to make a notebook and share with each other, regardless of what operating system you're using, regardless of which cloud you want to use a particular thing on. Having open standards actually really matters a lot, right? And then that means that one of you can build one extension, and that would apply to all of you. As opposed to you have to build a Microsoft extension, you have to build a SageMaker extension, you have a thing that can only be shared on Colab and only with certain Gmail login credentials, and it won't work in certain places in Europe, for whatever reason. So that's BS. We don't want that for our computational future. However, to have these open standards takes intentional hard work, and the level of that effort has to be impedance matched with the level of competitive interest from commercial vendors.
You talked about corporate, you talked about small businesses. What about government? Government, I saw in a conference full of government people how everyone loves Python. Everyone applauded when the Python was mentioned. However, at the same time, when you talk to the government people, they're afraid of Python because what's this open source coming into our systems? How does Anaconda approach it, and what do you see in the future for that?
Can you help me parse that question a little bit better? When you say everyone in government loves it and yet everyone's afraid of it, most things I love I'm not afraid of. So what is that?
So it depends who you talk to. So it's like when the name is mentioned publicly, everyone loves it, but then when you talk to people, it says, talk to people on the table, then you figure out, we have security issues, we have all sorts of other problems. So they don't necessarily see the Python in the same eyes once you talk to them one-to-one.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to make a bunch of really controversial statements all in a row. So, well, they're not really that controversial. So the idea of crossing the chasm. This is not controversial, right? Geoffrey Moore. This is Geoffrey Moore. Yeah. The crossing the chasm, and the idea you have innovators, early adopters. There's the chasm, and then there's the mainstream adoption, early and late majority and laggards. And the way that this works is that different people have different views of their own ability to lean into change and technological innovation. So the innovators are the people who are like, I'm going to download it, compile it myself, and try to make this thing work because I can do it. I believe in my own ability to do it. Like you would never decompress a tarball of code if you didn't think you could actually compile it and use it, right? That would be insane. So like I'm not going to order a box full of airplane parts because I don't know how to put it together. I would rather just buy an airplane. So from that perspective, that's really what separates these two halves. And in the mainstream adoption part, you have companies who actually don't have confidence in their ability to implement technology and technology change. So most large institutions, I would say institutions in the world, America's actually on the forefront. You go to Europe, the situation is dramatically worse, right? And there's other places in the world that's much worse. Despite all of our thing about, oh, AI is going to take over everything and Skynet's coming and all this other stuff, most of the world can't even build a web server, right? So the institutions, most of these institutions, they know they're bad at technology. And especially in big publicly traded companies here in America, government institutions where they've had to basically outsource a bunch of stuff to piles of consultants. It's basically a jobs program. That's been going on for 20 years, that basically institutions have sucked at owning their technological future. But that's been okay, because it was the era of monoculture, the Wintel duopoly. You build some stuff in C#, you build some stuff in Java, you deploy it, you do some stuff, and everything is basically 1/10, 1,000th as powerful as it could be, and you're wasting a bunch of money, but no one cares because everyone else is equally bad. What's happening now with the rise of data science, machine learning, all this other stuff, is that in order to cross this chasm, you've got to learn to swim. You can't just sit here in the hot tub and say, I'm a swimmer. You've got to actually swim to get to the other side of this adaptive valley. And most of these companies are ill-equipped to do that. There's an awareness of that, however, and people are starting, just starting about 4 years ago, I think there's a broad awareness, people are starting to make that transition. But all of these institutions that have been basically just coasting for so long, they have to make a hard decision. And actually, someone I won't name, but he's a big shot technologist from Microsoft, he described it as the impending mass extinction event, because there's a lot of businesses that are not ready to cross that chasm. Now, to your actual question about what do we do with these government institutions, at the end of the day, we are just technologists and creators. We're not corporate management consultants, right? You don't own a whole BU at McKinsey to go and back up a bus of consultants to go and help reform these government institutions. So you have to basically understand the topological space of what you're trying to affect change within. They're not going to be able to change how they view technology overnight. And so in that case, you actually have to think about productizing your services and think about how do I take this change, put it in a brown paper bag, and vend this in a way that's manageable and understandable to these people on this other side. So I would almost say to them, if they're afraid of Python, then stop talking to them about Python. Talk to them about AI, because they love AI, right? It just turns out you're going to use a pile of Python, that's what's in the box, but you just sell them, you know what I'm saying? Like take the gift wrap paper and just say, which wrapping paper do I need, right? Is it big data paper? Here's the big data paper. It's still Python inside it, right, with some Dask. Is it AI paper? Here's the AI paper. But it's the same stuff inside. At some point, and I think most people here, you're here because you're here on a weekend. It's going to be a nice day. You're here on a weekend because you want to learn. You're learners. You want to lean into learning more stuff. You're creators and innovators, right? That's awesome. Most people in the world are not that. And worse, most institutions in the world are not that. So it's good. We should always try to lean in and try to get people to teach. We should always try to teach. But also recognize there is still a fundamental, there's just the medium itself resists change. So at some point you have to say, you know what, I can't teach everybody within this org. I've just got to vend something to them and have a point of demarcation, right? You vend to the point of your customer's ignorance. And that's just what it is.
Peter, thank you for your willingness to share controversial statements with us.
Oh.
I was just,
Are we out of time?
no. I was going to just piggyback and say, are there any other controversial statements you want to share with the group here?
No, that's all I have. Yeah. So she had her hand up over there, I think.
Thank you. I'm Lily, and I appreciate letting us pick your brain.
Thank you, Lily.
I'm wondering if you have thoughts or experiences with governance structures for open source projects.
I do, but is there anything in particular that you want to ask about, or a particular problem you want me to speak to?
I have the opportunity to try and improve our governance structure right now for our project, and so I'm trying to kind of crowdsource experiences.
Okay. Can I ask you to come to my next session?
Yes,
and we'll
I will
talk
be
about it, because there's a whole infrastructure of thought behind kind of exactly that question, and I'll speak to that. That's basically the content of my next talk.
Fabulous. Thank
Thank you.
Hi. If Anaconda didn't exist today, and you had to create it once again from scratch today, what would you do differently?
So if Anaconda didn't exist, and you mean the Conda technology stack, the hundreds of millions of packages in our cloud services, all these things didn't exist today, and I had to recreate it today, what would I try to accomplish with it, or why would I create it?
What would you do differently comparing to the first iteration?
What I would do differently, well, it's hard to know what's being held constant. I want to really think about this. So let's assume then that people were using Python successfully, and there was open innovation still being done, and it wasn't just you were using MS Python or AWS Python. With only AWS's deep learning stuff and their versions of their wheels only. I think, actually, so here's the fun thing. The right way to build a business is to ask that question every day, right? There's only so much of the business that is the sustaining momentum of what you've done before. But you don't ever want to be on a ballistic trajectory. You should always be asking, okay, today, what changed from yesterday, and what's new, and what should we do today? So I basically ask that question every day, but not with the if Anaconda didn't exist, but with, of course, Anaconda existing. If everything else were the same, and I don't know, I think I would be pushing on the same things. I mean, I'm sorry, like the answer is kind of not controversial or surprising, but I would continue to try to establish open standards between some of these competing. I think there will still be this tension of different cloud vendors. What's coming down the pike in all this stuff is new kinds of chips, a lot of inference chips and a lot of vector processors that will completely balkanize the technology space. And I would try to build things that actually pull that together. I would also try to push for many, many more people learning how to use these kinds of tools and learn these technologies and learn the modes of thought of quantitative thinking. I would continue doing that too. I mean, those are the things I would do. I would just have to do it completely differently because I would be starting not sitting here at Anaconda, but doing, from a different place. But it would be hard. I mean, there is just to be clear, there's a hysteresis in all these things. It's a complex space. There's a hysteresis to the phase state evolution. So what that means is that if Anaconda didn't exist, we probably would have a balkanized set of wheels on all these different places. Everyone would have install hell. I mean, it just would be terrible. And then people, if you want to basically do some new computer vision thing with a drone and some other stuff, you'd have to pick which cloud vendors, captive IoT walled garden, which chips, which drones, which things, and then you build one tiny little thing. You put 5 years of your life into building a really cool thing, and then only a tiny fraction of the market could use it, when the entire market could have used it if it wasn't all balkanized into little walled gardens. So once it's balkanized that way, though, breaking all those walls and uniting people, especially when corporate interests are trying to keep people within those walls, it's much harder than if we didn't have those walls to start with. That's what I mean by the hysteresis. So I don't actually, given that, if that was the state of the world, I don't know that I would go into that because that would just be too hard. I mean, I've got an actual life to live. I got kids. I mean, I got stuff to do, right? So I would just be angry about it a lot. Yeah. Other questions?
Kind of a non-technical question. How do you balance your life as CEO and the balance with your family? So how is that working for you?
How or how well is it working for me? Okay. I'm pretty tired. I mean, and I don't really do very much outside of work and then spend time with the kids. And also, my wife is amazing, and she picks up a lot of the slack. But otherwise, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say I have a particularly good solution to that right now. I just work a lot, and yeah. It's probably not sustainable in the long run, but I mean, that's all I do is just like kids and home or work, and it's just that.
So you mentioned one particular, you mentioned the sharks. One shark of interest to some people in this community would be the difficulty of working with Bloomberg at times, and they've exposed through CMP and through BLP some of those tools. But what is your perspective of working with them going forward when they've had open dissatisfaction with Anaconda for seemingly no reason other than it basically allows the community to unite, or I mean the community of quantitative traders?
I'm afraid, sorry, I don't quite know that I know the context for the question. Can you clarify just that a little bit? We've been openly hostile with them?
No, Bloomberg's been openly hostile with you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is that, like, they never said anything to me about it. Like, is it?
So the way I would describe it is, so I consult a lot with what I would call quantitative traders, and they use Bloomberg as their data feeds.
Sure.
And so you go through this process of hey, we need to set up this environment for a quantitative environment. Let's just use Anaconda, and then some of your additional tools will follow through automatically. And they're like, well, we would really not like you to use Anaconda, and we would oppose that conversation.
Okay.
And so this is through over and over conversations where I'm like working as a vendor to support quantitative traders.
Okay, so it's not like a strategic thing. It may be or maybe a strategic. I have no idea. Okay, so we should talk offline about that, because like we've seen situations in the past where people want their own Python environment, they want control over it. I think Esri is a great example, right? So ArcGIS has embedded ArcPy. For a long time, they had their own build, had their own builds of NumPy, SciPy, and all this other stuff. And then it took an internal movement for a while for them. People internally were like, we need to use Anaconda with this. Everyone in the community was like, we would love to use Anaconda inside ArcGIS. And so it just took a little while for the mindsets to change there. If it's basically just a product integration kind of issue, then the way to do that is actually just have a deeper partnership conversation. And I know people at Bloomberg, and we can try to maybe break some ground there. And I'd love to, talk to me afterwards. I'd love to know a little bit more about that. Yeah, Travis as well knows people there. There will be some people that get talking to from their bosses, maybe, is what's going to happen. Right, Travis? We'll make it happen? Yeah, all right.
What would be the best advice you can give about leadership?
The best advice about leadership is, I will paraphrase Mad Men, that leadership consists of three things: vision, loyalty, and experience or wisdom. But you need all three things. And ultimately, my view on leadership is that leadership is service. And that's not everyone's view on it. Some people run differently. I've done a lot of, it's a great question. I love this topic, but I've just written so many notes and had so many thoughts about it. It's all flooding in. It's like getting bottlenecked. I would say that that's the thing I would start with, is this idea that vision, loyalty, and wisdom or experience. At the end of the day, a leader of an organization or movement, they have to create, some people say dispel disbelief, that the first job of a leader is to dispel disbelief. Others say that it's to create belief. And either way, it's kind of the same thing. But that all goes to the vision bit, right? You have to tell people, we're going to go there. And people are like, well, we're not there now, and we've never been there. How do we know we can get there, right? Ultimately, if you're leading people, it has to be about that. And that's just the fundamental thing. So when people talk about Steve Jobs and they disparage his reality distortion field, that's just what it feels like to be in an environment where someone has strong leadership. Now, cult leaders have the same thing, but they're strong leaders, right? I wouldn't say I would follow them, but that's strong leadership. So anyway, yeah, thank you.
What's been the most frustrating thing you've seen in the Python community in the last like 5 or 10 years?
How much time do we have now?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, all right, 1 per year. The most frustrating thing, well, it varies because my skin's gotten thicker over time. So stuff that would have totally riled me up 5 years ago, I'm just like, eh. I think ultimately it's Dunning-Kruger. So there are a lot of really, really smart geeks who don't realize what they don't know about everything else that it takes to move a community forward. A lot of people, actually Douglas Adams wrote in his book, Last Chance to See, I think it was, he had this parable of the pond that wakes up in the morning, and it's like, wow, what an amazing world, what a benevolent creator to have made a hole just the right shape for me. And this is amazing, right? Everything is just right for me to be here. I think there's some people in the Python community who have no idea of what dug the hole that gave them their opportunity right now. And they're not aware then of the risks to that. So I think for me right now, well, the most frustrating thing for me right now is probably the most frustrating thing over the last period of time. And it's that Python has managed to do something absolutely incredible. I cannot sing enough praises of what people in the community, and that's all the NumFOCUS people here, again, here on a weekend, and they do this all the time, and they're flying away from families to go and do essentially rallying of a community of volunteers, right? People who have to argue with their managers to get time and budget to travel. And we've built this because we care. And so it's a community that cares about a technology and technology impact thing. That's actually really rare in technology. I mean, I'm a physicist by training. I didn't try to be a software entrepreneur because that's what I was going to do. I mean, I ended up kind of in the industry accidentally, and I've gotten just more and more cynical about industry as I've interacted with it more. But it's like, holy crap, there's like everything that's popular and worth hundreds of billions of dollars is actually made, it's built not with those values. And so we have here a community and ecosystem, a verdant, elven glade that's amazing, and everything else is just like concrete jungles and crap. And yet the community that built this, some of them just live in a cave underground, and they don't have any idea of why everything's so awesome and why everything will soon cease to be awesome if they don't actually lean into owning their destiny. That's the most frustrating thing. Like if we were just hobbits in the Shire, always living in our holes and never having a shot at glory, fine. But we've not just had a shot at glory. We're it now. We are Mordor, right? But we got well, okay. This kind of went off the rail. We're the dominant thing, and that is such a rare moment to have that platform and have a network, an ecosystem of generativity arise to that level. We got to do something with it. And yet there's still people in the community who just floating along like a little pond, right? The whole feels good for me right now. This is great. And that's really frustrating for me. We're not Mordor. Please don't tweet that.
I think we have just a few more minutes. Do you have any closing thoughts, or I can throw it out for one more question?
Let's do another question. Okay. Yeah.
Anyone got last question?
What is your most controversial opinion about the Python ecosystem?
I could tell you, but I would have to attribute it to Steve Dower. No, my most controversial opinion about the Python ecosystem, I don't know. I mean, actually, there's just so many. I don't know. There's a lot. What? Just one? Well, I mean, maybe the most controversial. Maybe it's actually not that. Here's the thing. It's actually not the most controversial, but probably the least understood by everyone. Is that product management for the Python language has basically stalled, in my opinion. That we are in maintenance mode on language features and things like that. And maybe my most controversial opinion building on that is that that's okay. Ooh. And maybe that's okay. And so whereas, 18 months ago, I would have been like super care mad, maybe I'm like, you know what, maybe this is actually the natural order of things. And it's to be a stable foundation for what comes next.
I think we all really appreciate Peter coming out here and sharing his thoughts. Can we give him a round of applause, please?
Thank you, everyone.